97 separate claims were presented, and not a single one succeeded. That is the number that should make you pause before anything else in this story, because it reveals something that a simple headline can never fully capture. This was not a close defeat, nor was it a situation where a few allegations were upheld while the rest gradually fell apart during the process.
A good day for them, a good day for journalism, a great day for press freedom, and a very bad day for ginger, whining, treacherous little weasel. More on that in a moment.
We will come back to that shortly. Harry filed 97 separate claims against the publishers of the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday, building his case through an 11-week trial that unfolded across 45 full days of testimony, cross-examination, and legal arguments. In the end, the judge rejected every single claim. It was not just most of them or even the vast majority. Every one of them was dismissed without a single exception. Reports also suggest that Harry arrived in Britain that week with two completely different speeches already prepared in advance. One had been written in case he won, while the other was ready in case he lost.
We can all sit here and laugh and poke at him and say, you have turned yourself, mate, into a humiliation. Because the High Court judgment found that Harry gave limited evidence on the issues at the heart of the case and strayed beyond factual evidence while in the witness box. In other words, he lied.
At the exact moment the verdict was delivered, Harry was attending a public Invictus event at Chatham House. He was surrounded by veterans while cameras continued recording the event when someone quietly approached him and personally informed him of the court's decision. Because of that outcome, he never had the opportunity to deliver the speech he had genuinely hoped he would use. Now let us focus on the key detail that ultimately shaped the case, because it deserves far more attention than the headline figure alone usually receives. While giving evidence under oath before the court, Harry stated that his inner circle was kept extremely private. He insisted that he had no close friendships with journalists and that no one around him was in a position to leak personal information. He told the court directly, "My social circles were not leaky," and stressed that he wanted to make that point absolutely clear. That statement became the foundation of all 97 claims, because if his inner circle truly was as secure as he described under oath, then the only remaining explanation for how private stories repeatedly appeared in newspapers over the years would have been unlawful methods of gathering information, including phone hacking or private investigators acting outside the law.
Just a defeat in a civil case. This is Harry being exposed as not telling the truth under oath in the King's Court. This is serious stuff.
Mail's legal team then introduced a series of Facebook messages from years earlier between Harry and Charlotte Griffiths, the Mail on Sunday's royal correspondent. The tone of those conversations seriously challenged the image Harry had presented under oath. The messages were relaxed, familiar, and clearly friendly in the way people with a close connection would normally speak to each other. One message began with, "Hi, it's H," followed by a note to make sure she recognized him from his profile picture. Griffiths replied, "Hello, Mr. Mischief." Their conversation continued over several messages using first names, and at one point they even mentioned missing their movie Snuggles together. That particular phrase quickly became one of the most talked about and widely repeated lines from the entire 11-week trial, appearing in coverage from almost every major outlet reporting on the case.
And I've said this to you a lot before, is I just think if I'm King Charles, enough of this bullshit. Just strip them of the titles, Meghan and Harry, let them do their thing, stop the drama, the circus that applies to them everywhere they go, and just keep them away from...
According to the arguments made in court, Griffiths had kept those messages private for well over 10 years before they were revealed during the trial. They were presented only after her credibility had been questioned. That kind of contradiction can have real and lasting significance in a courtroom, no matter how small it may seem when viewed outside the context of sworn legal testimony. When a witness tells a judge under oath that no relationships of that nature ever existed, and is then confronted with clear documentary evidence showing that at least one did, it naturally leads to much closer examination of the rest of their testimony. The messages themselves were not considered shocking. Instead, it was the contradiction between the sworn statement and the documented evidence that became the real focus of the case.
Meghan is a source of evil. I've said it many years ago, and it didn't make me popular with some people, but she's bad.
Reports from inside the courtroom described the presiding judge stepping in on more than one occasion during Harry's testimony to guide him back to answering the specific questions being asked instead of moving into broader explanations. The same reports also described his exchanges with the Mail's legal team becoming increasingly confrontational and noticeably more tense as the testimony continued over several days.
Never witnessed anything in terms of what we were accused of doing, and the accusations were despicable. So I feel emotional. I feel vindicated, Piers, is how I feel.
Well, you've been completely vindicated, as has the Mail. Complete.
Stay with me because the personal side of this case deserves genuine attention before we move on to the reactions. Royal journalist Katie Nishal, who has spent around 20 years covering the royal family on Fleet Street through multiple reigns and generations, had 17 of her own articles examined in detail during the proceedings. Her sources and the way she gathered her information were challenged directly in open court in front of lawyers and the judge, all while she was recovering from major cancer surgery. She later explained that there were times when she could barely climb a single flight of stairs, yet she still had to search through old notebooks to defend reporting she had written years before. Take a moment to consider that combination of circumstances because it deserves real recognition. She was trying to recover from major surgery while, at the very same time, her professional reputation, built over 2 decades of work, was being publicly examined and challenged in a courtroom.
Not a good day for Prince Harry, not a good week for Prince Harry, and I just have no more sympathy for this man. All he does is whine and complain and expect everything.
One critic summed up their opinion by saying that Harry does nothing but complain, keep complaining, and expect everything to go his way. When the final ruling was delivered, the judge did not simply reject the claims connected to Katie Nishal's reporting and leave it at that. Instead, he went much further by describing her as a credible and impressive witness and formally accepting her evidence as truthful and dependable. For any professional journalist, receiving that kind of finding from a judge in a major court case carries significant professional value that reaches far beyond a single trial. Speaking afterward with visible emotion, Nishal reflected honestly on what 2 decades in journalism had really involved. She explained that it was never the glamorous career many people imagine, but rather years of knocking on doors, patiently building trust, and earning reliable sources through steady, relationship-based reporting. She spoke about one particular source, a woman in her 70s who had been genuinely close to the late Queen and who only agreed to speak with Nishal after many years of developing trust. She explained that this confidence had been earned through traditional reporting methods and patient relationship building, not through anything resembling unlawful practices. As Nishal put it, "I did journalism the hard way. I never witnessed anything in terms of what we were accused of doing." If this breakdown is highlighting the important details that were largely overlooked beneath the simple headlines most outlets focused on. Supporting the channel helps make more in-depth analysis like this possible. Stay with me because there is also an important part of this case that worked in Harry's favor, and fairness requires acknowledging it before moving on. Estimates suggest the case could ultimately cost as much as $60 million once all legal fees and trial expenses are fully calculated under UK rule.
The case could cost as much as $60 million once legal fees and trial expenses are fully calculated under UK rules. Harry could also be ordered to pay a significant portion of the Associated Newspapers costs, potentially adding millions more. I would argue 50 million more plus 60. It could be 100 million.
Some estimates even suggest the total cost could climb as high as 100 million. Not everything revealed during this trial reflected negatively on Harry, and it is important to give this part of the case the attention it deserves before turning to the more damaging evidence. The court heard allegations that a private investigator working on behalf of the Mail obtained the exact airline seat number of Harry's former girlfriend, Chelsea Davy, and even discussed the possibility of placing someone in the seat directly beside her during an international flight. If those allegations are accurate, they describe conduct that would be deeply disturbing by any reasonable standard. Harry's legal team argued strongly that such actions came dangerously close to what most people would regard as stalking.
When we found out the results, he was doing a speech at Chatham House and his voice was shaking. He was all alone. He was clearly broken by the whole thing. Yeah. His wife wasn't by his side.
Harry's wife was not by his side during these proceedings. The court also heard separate testimony from Elton John and his husband, David Furnish, who stated under oath that they genuinely believed someone had improperly and unlawfully gained access to their newborn son's private birth certificate and confidential medical records. Another part of the testimony focused on how Harry first discovered that he had been named the godfather of his former nanny's child. He argued that this information could only have reached both the public and himself through an improper source because it was not publicly known or available at that time. These allegations are unquestionably serious, regardless of where anyone ultimately stands on the overall case or its final outcome. They deserve to be considered carefully on their own merits rather than being completely dismissed simply because the wider legal case was unsuccessful.
Just guide you back across the pond to what is happening here, because it involves an old friend of yours and mine, Prince Harry, the rogue son, who is crash landing into the UK today, and there's this gigantic furore, as always, has erupted around the little entitled bride.
However, this is the legal distinction that ultimately determined the outcome of the entire case. And it is probably the most important point to understand when asking why a case involving such serious allegations still ended in such a complete defeat. Making an allegation of a privacy violation, no matter how serious it may be or how strongly it is believed, is not the same as proving that violation under the legal standard required in a civil court. Because this was a civil case, the judge was not applying the criminal standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Instead, the decision was based on the balance of probabilities, meaning the court had to determine what was more likely than not to have happened.
Make is on hypocrisy, that Harry has made a fortune, gazillions of pounds, trashing his family and revealing the most extraordinarily intimate secrets.
Invading everyone else's privacy.
So this is the great royal privacy invader trying to put up this fake sword of the Shining Knight, taking on the journalist for doing exactly what he does.
Now let us turn to the reaction following the verdict, because Piers Morgan and Tom Bower made their views clear the moment the ruling was announced. And their comments sparked another wave of headlines that continued for days. Morgan opened his program shortly after the decision was released and did not soften his language in the slightest. He described it as a good day for journalism, a great day for press freedom, and a very bad day for what he called, in his own words, ginger whining. Treacherous little weasels, those were his exact words spoken live on air. Bower took a more restrained approach, but many believed his comments carried an even stronger message. He said the judge had shown remarkable courage because, while he had not directly called Harry a liar, the ruling strongly suggested that he did not accept his evidence. Morgan went even further by referring to his own long history with the royal family. He claimed that Princess Diana regularly contacted him when he worked as a newspaper editor, that she knew their conversations were being recorded, and that she was always given a copy of anything involving her before publication so she could make corrections or suggest changes. His main argument was that the idea every royal story published over the years came only from phone hacking or other unlawful methods simply did not reflect how he believed many relationships between journalists and royal sources had actually worked. According to Morgan, many stories came from conversations, trusted contacts, and people who willingly chose to share information. The same discussion also returned to Harry's continuing dispute over publicly funded security in the United Kingdom, an issue that has remained separate from this court case but continues to attract major attention. Morgan and commentator Kinsey Schofield argued that requesting that level of protection for private visits risked making those trips appear almost identical to official royal engagements. Family lawyer Paul Aron Adrian challenged that view, pointing out that Prince Andrew received publicly funded security for years under very different circumstances. Some observers see that comparison as evidence of inconsistent treatment within the royal family, while others believe the two situations are entirely different and should not be compared. During the same discussion, Tom Bower was asked for his opinion on the future of Harry and Meghan's marriage, and his answer was far more cynical than many expected. He said he believes the marriage will continue, but mainly because of practical necessity rather than lasting romance. In his view, they now depend on one another more than ever because several of their business ventures have fallen short of expectations, making them increasingly reliant on maintaining a shared public image instead of remaining together purely out of personal choice. Harry was not the only person involved in this legal action, and the other claimants deserve recognition instead of being treated as a footnote. Elton John, Elizabeth Hurley, Sadie Frost, David Furnish, former MP Simon Hughes, and Baroness Doreen Lawrence were all part of the case. And reports suggested that some genuinely believed they had a strong chance of success before the judgment was delivered. After the ruling, Simon Hughes publicly described the outcome as deeply disappointing. Even Tom Bower, despite years of publicly criticizing Harry, said the claimant he felt the greatest sympathy for was Baroness Doreen Lawrence, whose son Stephen Lawrence was murdered in a racially motivated attack that became one of the most significant criminal cases in modern British history. Bower pointed to the difficult position she faced by bringing legal action against a newspaper that had spent years campaigning to help secure justice for her son. Some commentators have also noted that Harry has the financial means and public profile to absorb a defeat of this scale in a way that not every claimant involved in the case can, given their very different personal and financial circumstances. Paul Dacker, the Mail's editor-in-chief and a longtime target of Harry's criticism in interviews and his memoir, responded to the verdict with the blunt style for which he is well known. He argued that Harry had publicly revealed countless private family matters while at the same time accusing others of violating his own privacy. Dacker remarked that there was not a laundry in the universe large enough to clean all the dirty linen Harry had aired about his family, adding that Harry's privacy complaints took not just the biscuit but the entire tin. He also claimed that Princess Diana herself had regularly read and trusted the Mail during some of the most difficult years of her life. Supporters of the newspaper argued that this history made broader claims of decades of unlawful conduct against the royal family harder to accept. Another detail leading up to the trial also attracted attention. Reports indicated that before the case officially began, Harry's legal team quietly explored the possibility of reaching a financial settlement around Christmas, more than 6 months before the final judgment. According to those reports, the Mail declined the offer and chose instead to defend the case fully in open court, after the verdict overwhelmingly favored the newspaper. Many commentators said that decision reflected strong confidence in its legal position and a willingness to have all of the evidence tested publicly despite the enormous financial risks for both sides. Those costs were extraordinary. Under the loser pays principle that generally applies in UK civil cases, the unsuccessful party can be required to contribute to the winning side's legal expenses in addition to paying their own. Before the trial even began, the court heard that total legal costs could approach £40 million. By the end of the 11-week trial and 45 court days, some estimates placed that figure much closer to £50 million. Insurance may cover part of those costs, and additional policies could reduce the final amount further, but depending on the court's final cost order and the terms of each policy, a substantial balance could still remain. Another hearing is scheduled for the end of July to decide exactly how those legal costs will be divided among the parties. All of this unfolded during what many commentators described as one of the most challenging periods of Harry's public life since stepping back from royal duties. Reports stated that Buckingham Palace had initially offered him accommodation during his visit to the United Kingdom, But that offer was later withdrawn after a decision was reportedly not made within the required deadline. Meghan and the children remained in the United States throughout the visit, adding another layer to an already difficult week. At the same time, separate reports suggested that the Invictus Games Foundation, the cause most closely linked to Harry's public identity, was facing significant financial pressures and fundraising challenges ahead of future events. For many people watching these events unfold, it appeared that another opportunity to rebuild ties with the palace had quietly slipped away while his family remained across the Atlantic, and a legal defeat carrying potential costs of around £50 million dominated headlines around the world. The final legal costs have not yet been determined and will depend on the hearings scheduled for the end of July. The other claimants are also continuing to assess what this verdict means for their own situations and what steps they may take next. As for the broader impact on Harry's public reputation in the months ahead, that remains uncertain, and no one can say with confidence how events will unfold. What do you think? Did the contradiction involving Charlotte Griffith's messages change the way you view Harry's testimony under oath throughout the 11-week trial? Or was the outcome always likely to depend on the legal standard itself rather than any single piece of evidence? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you have not already, subscribe before the next video.